Well, thank you so much, Jaden. It just strikes me that with the theme today on be strong and of good courage, that Jaden is showing significant courage to stand alone before us, and he's speaking words of courage as he's calling us to be strong and courageous. It reminds me of Paul's words to young Timothy, probably not quite as young as Jaden is, but still young in his role as a leader in the church. 1 Timothy 4:12, where he told Timothy, "Let no one look down on your youthfulness, but rather in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity, show yourself an example of those who believe." Well, our theme verse today, which, by the way, is Joshua 1:9, not 1:8, as we have printed in Connections, which is not entirely our fault because the Brethren website junior high page actually got it wrong up at the top. But don't worry, all of their content is right, and it all relates. But Joshua 1:9 is the main text for their theme, and as you might guess, it talks about someone else that we sometimes think of as a young man. Another person's story. Again, not as young as Jaden, probably not as young as Timothy, especially at the time that this was written. But let's get a little historical context of a man we know as Joshua. These words were said to Joshua about 40 years after the Exodus from Egypt, 40 years after Moses said, "Let my people go," and 40 years after the plagues, 40 years after the Red Sea, 40 years after Joshua, who then would have been much younger, some say as young as 19. We don't know for sure. Joshua had been one of the 12 spies who were sent into the land of Canaan to scout it out. Whatever his age, Joshua, along with Caleb, another youngish man, though probably older than Joshua, they had shown tremendous courage themselves. They had shown courage in standing up against the other 10 spies who were fearful, the other 10 spies who counseled the people not to go into the land. In contrast, Joshua and Caleb showed courage by giving a minority view, showed courage by encouraging the people, by urging them to have courage to take the land, trusting in the God who had delivered them earlier from Egypt. Well, the people listened to the 10, not to Joshua and Caleb. Fast forward 40 years. All of the older generation has died in the wilderness. And now Joshua is at least 59. And we know that's not young at all, is it? It's getting younger all the time. Joshua has seen God's continued provision of water and food for the nation of Israel. He has actually led the Israelite army into battle against the Amalekites. He has seen God's judgment against complaining and unbelief. But now he faces the biggest task and test of his life. Moses has died, and God is calling Joshua to take Moses' place and to lead this new generation into the land of promise, into Canaan. So I'm going to read actually Joshua 1:8 and 7 and 6. I'm going to start with verse 1. I'm going to skip a few verses and then come down to verse 9 just to give us the context in the book of Joshua. It says, "After the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, and Un, Moses' assistant. He said, 'Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore, the time has come for you to lead these people, the Israelites, across the Jordan River into the land I am giving them. No one will be able to stand against you as long as you live, for I will be with you as I was with Moses. I will not fail you or abandon you. Be strong and courageous, for you are the one who will lead these people to possess all the land I swore to their ancestors I would give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the instructions Moses gave you. Do not deviate from them, turning either to the right or to the left. Then you will be successful in everything you do. Study this book of instruction carefully, continually. Meditate on it day and night, so you will be sure to obey everything written in it. Only then will you prosper and succeed in all you do. This is my command. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Three things I want to highlight in this passage, and then I want to apply them to us here this morning, collectively and individually, wherever we are in our life's journey. We see in this passage identified is God's plan for Joshua. In other words, what God wants him to do. Very specific, God made it plain to Joshua, you are the one who is to lead these people into the land of promise. That was God's plan for Joshua. We also see God's path, how God wants Joshua to be. Not just what he wants him to do, but how he wants him to be, how he wants him to conduct himself as he fulfills the plan that's been laid before him. And God didn't just spell it out again. He actually asked Joshua to do some of this work. The second time in this passage, he says, be strong and very courageous. He says, be careful to obey all the instructions Moses gave you. Then you will be successful. Study this book continually. Meditate on it day and night so you'll be sure to obey everything written in it. Then you will prosper and succeed in what you do. God required Joshua to read and study, to incorporate into his life all the wisdom, all the instruction, all the guidance that God had given to his people through Moses, the 10 Commandments, and so much more. So we have God's plan, the specific task to which he'd called Joshua, God's path, how he wanted Joshua to be, what kind of person as he fulfilled the plan. And thirdly, we have God's promise. The third time God says, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And that was God's promise to him. Now, I want us to think for a moment. Joshua had shown courage in the past, right? He showed tremendous courage when he came back from the land as maybe a 19-year-old, and he told the people, don't listen to these other men. They may be older than me. They're telling you all about giants in the land. They're telling you all about how the cities are walled and we can never do this. Don't listen to them. God will help us to take this land. Joshua was familiar with courage. Remember, he had actually led Israel into battle while they were in the wilderness against the Amalekites. But this was different. Up until now, Joshua had always had Moses to have his back. Joshua was an assistant to Moses. Moses was in charge. I want to suggest sometimes it's easier to have courage when you're supported by the guy in charge or the woman in charge. But now, after 40 years of watching Moses lead, now Moses isn't there anymore. And God says, Joshua, it's your turn. There's nobody above you but God. There's no buffer there. You're the leader. And I want us to think about our different life stages. I want us to think about being in junior high. For some of us, we have to think a really long time ago, right? But there was a time when all of us, like Jaden, were even not in junior high yet. And we maybe watched those big kids in junior high, and we had ideas about what it was going to be like when we get to be junior high. Wow, we're going to have it all figured out. We're going to be king of the hill when we get to junior high. And then we get there, and suddenly, well, nobody told me about this challenge, and nobody told me it was going to be like this. This is kind of hard. We could say the same thing about senior high. Sorry, Jaden, I know it looks like senior high. That's reaching the top, but we're going to get there and find out, this is hard. So maybe it's college, right? College students out there, recent college students. No, at every stage in life, it's like you can look ahead and think, man, this is how I'm going to be when I get there. I'm just going to have all the confidence and courage, and we get there, and it's like, man, this is hard. Let's think of some other life stages. Newlyweds. No comments here this morning, okay? Oh, I got this. This is going to be a piece of cake. I know other people struggle, but not me. We're not going to, no. We love each other. And then from what I hear, sometimes it gets hard. I hear it especially from my wife. Newly employed, boy, I'm going to knock this job out of the park. New parent. Oh, I've seen everybody else, but boy, I know what I'm doing. Surprise. Seems like it follows us all the way through. Even as older adults. There were times when we were younger and we looked ahead and said, "No, I'm going to be different." And then we get there and surprise. I'll give you a very personal story. Personal, not so much. I was part of it, but I think I've shared this before. My dad in the last years, especially the last months of his life, he had spent his life as a pastor. He had time and again sat beside other people and counseled them and encouraged them, told them to be strong and to have courage and tried to point them to God who was with them. And yet he got there, and in his older age, it became a little bit harder for him to tell himself that. And when he got there and faced some of the struggles of his life, he found himself leaning on other people and needing to be reminded to be strong and to be of good courage. And I share that not to put him down. I share that as an example to help each one of us say, okay, that's human nature. It's human nature that at every stage in life to never outgrow the need to be reminded. To never outgrow the need to be told, be strong, be of good courage. The Lord your God is with you. This has application to us collectively this morning, doesn't it? I want to suggest that there was an aspect of this whole consultation process, this sharing the vision where we're back and we're assessing, we're all giving our input, and then the Catalyst team is just sifting through all of the ideas and looking at the priorities and giving it their best effort to think what will be the best plan for us. And we get excited about this, and we've got this great plan. And then we get up to the starting line, and it's like, man, are we going to be able to do this? And a few months back, we kind of envisioned. And then we get there, and it's like, once again, we need to be reminded, be strong, be courageous. God is with us. So let's go back briefly to that plan and path and promise. I understand that God's plan is not always as clear to us as it was made to Joshua. I get that. It hasn't always been for me either. Sometimes God announces his plan, like he did to Joshua. Maybe not out loud, but in some way that that is unmistakable, that God calls us, God speaks to us, God lets us know his plan for us. But not always. Sometimes it's not God announcing. Sometimes it's God answering our prayer, not for the big picture, but one step at a time. I think of Isaiah 30, where God says to his people, he says that he will be with them to teach them through all of the hardship they go through. He will be with them. And in Isaiah 30, verse 21, he says, your own ears will hear him. Right behind you, a voice will say, this is the way you should go, whether to the right or to the left. And it's kind of speaking of sometimes guidance doesn't come by saying, oh, this is where you're supposed to go. Sometimes it's saying, this is where this is your next step. Okay, turn here. And when you do that, I'll show you the next step. In answer to our prayers, in answer to our saying, Lord, guide me. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. He doesn't say he's always going to show you the end point when you want to know it. But as we are looking to him, he says he will direct us in answer to our searching, our seeking, our prayers. And sometimes God's plan for us is simply the place where we are. If God has not announced something specifically, if God has not given us some clear direction, then we need to focus on where we are. And for the moment, that's God's plan for us, unless and until he moves us someplace else. Now, the context was different, but Paul talked about this in 1 Corinthians 7. He says, each of you should continue to live in whatever situation the Lord has placed you, and remain as you were when God first called you. The important thing is to keep God's commandments. Now, understand, God still does call. He still does move people. But until he does, be faithful where we are. Until he does, where we are is God's plan for us. To be faithful in the midst of that. To be strong and courageous. To focus not only on what's God's plan down the road, but to say, what's God's path for me in this place where I am? How does God want me to be? And to make sure that I am seeking him, that I'm reading, I'm studying his word as he told Joshua, that I'm seeking to grow in my knowledge of God and the wisdom that's found in the scriptures, because no matter where I am, that's always going to be my best chance of success in the way that God is calling me to be successful. God's plan, what he wants us to do, will unfold as we seek him first, but it may be a step at a time. God's path is going to be made clear to us how God wants us to be. The more that we seek him, the more that we follow him, the more that we read and study and grow in our knowledge of him and the wisdom found in his word. And then God's promise to be with us wherever we go, as we seek his plan, as we follow the path that he's already laid out for us. And so the encouragement this morning, be strong and courageous in doing what God calls you to do. Be strong and courageous in being how God calls you to be. Be strong and courageous, because if you are pursuing God's call, God will be with you wherever you go.